Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Julie Lythcott-Haims in San Francisco, California. Julie is a writer, motivational speaker, and educator. She's currently on tour for her new book, How to Raise an Adult. How to Raise an Adult is a provocative manifesto that exposes the harms of helicopter parenting and sets forth an alternative philosophy for raising preteens and teens to self-sufficient young adulthood. She also served as Dean of Freshman and Undergraduate Advising for more than a decade at Stanford University, and she holds both a BA from Stanford and a JD from Harvard Law School. Julie, thanks for joining me today.
Angela, thanks so much for having me.
Well, we were just catching up before we started recording the podcast, and first I want to congratulate you on your book. It's such an exciting accomplishment.
Thank you. It's my first book, so I've got the nervousness of a newcomer, and I'm just really excited to see what happens to my book as it makes its way into communities beyond mine, such as yours.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really curious, what inspired you to write the book? What kind of got you thinking about this topic?
Oh, my goodness. Well, of course, we all know that the term helicopter parent or tiger mom or snowplow parent is just a very prevalent concept across our nation today. But once upon a time, it wasn't. And yet I was already 10 years ago quite concerned about what I was seeing on my own campus at Stanford University in terms of the encroachment of parents into realms that, quite frankly, had just been the realms inhabited by 18 to 22-year-olds in prior times. So I wrote my first op-ed piece back in 2005, just based on my own observations as a dean about what was going on, parents involved in the life of the university and the life of their sons and daughters to make decisions, make choices, solve problems, intervene, talk to authority figures, contest outcomes, that kind of thing. Based on what I was seeing, my hunch was that it would turn out to be problematic, not just annoying, to a university unaccustomed to parents playing these roles, but actually problematic in the lives of these young people. I guess essentially what my hunch was that these young people who were having so much done for them might emerge into adulthood not terribly familiar with their own selves, not terribly capable of making their own way. Fast forward 10 years, and everybody's talking about this. And the hunches that I had as a dean, simply concerned, compassionate about my students, concerned for their well-being, those hunches have been borne out. So I wrote my book because I care about all of us. I care about humans unfolding to become, the selves they're capable of being. And I guess it all boils down to I felt that parents with the best of intentions were getting in the way of their own kids' opportunity to develop and thrive.
That's great. I mentioned to you before we got started that this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I won't get into a ton of detail on the podcast, but I will say I have much younger siblings who they're more than 10 years younger than me. And I noticed, when they went away to college, I thought that they would probably become a little more separated from their parents. And our parents started going up on the weekends to do their laundry at the college, which was a couple of hours away. And I remember just being absolutely horrified. I couldn't believe that that their parents were showing up and doing this, and also that they were okay with it. That was a mutually beneficial thing. I would never have wanted my parents to do that.
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, Angela, because it was when I realized my students were okay with parental involvement that I really began to worry for their sake. What will become of them, and even more broadly, what will become of a society led by folks who really haven't seized, the mantle of leadership, who are still quite happy for, the older adults in their lives to handle things for them. That's when I became concerned about us as at a societal level. If I could say also, the laundry thing is such a ubiquitous example, and we all laugh about it, and we all say, usually it's moms who do that, and of course they love their kids and so on. Yes, and I'm a mom too. I should have said that right up front, Angela. I've got 2 teenagers here in the Bay Area that I'm working hard to raise to become, self-sufficient adults. And believe me, I get in the way of them doing that all the time. I have to check my own overparenting tendencies all the time. Laundry is one thing, though. I mean, if somebody emerges to be a 35-year-old that can't do his or her laundry, we can all kind of laugh about that or be annoyed about that or judge it or what have you. But the equivalent thing is happening when it comes to filling out forms, registering for things, talking to the landlord, negotiating the salary. Parents are essentially doing the hard work of living life for their kids as if their kids are still 2 or 3 or 4. And a 35-year-old, who can't kind of read through a benefits packet at a new job or figure out how to get themselves, insurance or deal with the security deposit and rent for a landlord, that person's lacking the skills they're, to make it in the world. If we parents just take a slightly longer view, we'll realize, hey, we're not going to be there forever. Biologically, we're supposed to predecease them. And we need, but seriously,
right.
I mean, if you really love your kid, do you want to train them to think you'll always be there? Or do you want to know they've got what it takes, not only to care for themselves, but maybe to care for their own kids one day?
Right. Yeah. It's funny that you say that. When I first noticed that this was happening, 'cause, I mean, my little brothers had such a fantastic experience growing up, I think. They had so much support and all this, parents around them and that kind of thing. So I had always been kind of impressed. But I remember I was visiting, I'm from Oklahoma, and I was there visiting when my brothers were in college. And my father said to me, "You won't believe what happened." And I said, "Oh, okay, what happened?" And he said, "We got a letter in the mail from the school, the college, and it was for an exchange program in another country." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Can you believe that?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really sure what you mean. Maybe I'm missing the point." And he said, "We weren't invited." And I went, "Oh, I never would have expected you to be invited to an overseas exchange program when they're in college." But okay. Yeah, that okay. And it was shocking not only that he said it, but that he expected me to get it. And that was the moment that I went, whoa, wait a second, what's going on here?
It's great that you bring up the example of overseas study, because I actually talk about this in my book. When I was trying to move from my own, observations and hunches, and to move from what I'd learned at Stanford to, what I'd learned from conversations with colleagues all over the nation. This was by no means, a problem only at Stanford University. It was happening at every college, in every tier, in every region of the nation. Parents were involved. And I wanted to move beyond, kind of anecdote, to full-fledged research, and I talked with over 100 people, and I consulted so many sources. But one place I went for more info was to the overseas studies community, because I thought, okay, American kids have been going abroad, for decades to various countries, to grow and learn and thrive and maybe serve. What are those folks seeing? In terms of differences, what's changed? And boy, did I get an earful. I spoke to someone at the Peace Corps who talked about how, parents today, want to know what's going on with their child, quote unquote, who's a member of the Peace Corps, who are second guessing Peace Corps decisions about medical situations and about what's happening, in country. Again, Peace Corps folks are 25, 26 years old,
Right.
But parents still think they have an important role to play. Pulling back a few years to the college level, I spoke to a guy named Tim at Arcadia University here in the U.S. that has a thriving overseas studies program. They send their own students there, abroad, but they also send students from around the nation, from various other American colleges and universities through their program, to various countries overseas. And boy, Tim gave me an earful about how neurotic and anxious American parents are these days. This new phenomenon of, if I don't know where he or she is at all times, I am panicked. And then, being that intermediary between, the kid, wherever he or she has flown to or is studying, and that parent who's frantic back here at home, has been a real challenge for Tim. But he has the temperament and the compassion, to appreciate what a parent's concerns are and to try to, help them calm down. But, essentially, Technology has given us the sense that we can know where our kids are at all times, and we've leapt from that to, therefore, I should know where they are at all times, and I should be in contact with them at all times. And not only is it neurotic, it also prevents them. If a kid goes to study in Paris or South Africa or Beijing, wherever, they're not going to immerse in that experience if they're constantly tethered by technology to Facebook or instant messaging or to texting folks back home. You can't sit with your aloneness and discover yourself more in this new place if you're constantly connected back home to, Memphis or Palo Alto or wherever you're from, So I thought that it was such a, parents want to go to the info sessions for, that overseas studies, and they want to be invited to travel over there. And yet the folks over there are saying, wait a minute, this program is about, the education of a young human. They grow and thrive when they're pushed a little bit outside their comfort zone. If mom or dad are right there, that's rather comforting, and they're not going to achieve that learning.
Absolutely. Well, I know for my regular listeners, they're probably thinking this is great, but what does this have to do with job seeking? Because that's really my sort of topic. But the reason that this was so interesting to me was that I've actually had experiences a number of times within my career coaching practice where I meet with people and help them to find a job where the parents have been the one who makes the appointment on behalf of the child, or I've had a parent ask if they could attend the career coaching sessions with their child. I had one parent who wanted to do the consultation on behalf of their child. The child they didn't even want them to be present. And then I had one parent who, I'm not like a resume writer. I coach people in how to write a better resume, how to present yourself better, how to have a better personal brand. But I don't do it for you. I teach you how to do it so you can be self-sufficient. And I had a parent get very angry with me because she wanted me to do the work for the child, and she just wanted to contract me to write the best resume and the best cover letter so that her child could submit it. So this issue has actually been showing up in my career coaching practice, surprisingly, quite a bit. And so I'm just wondering, from your perspective, I've heard rumors of parents going with their children to job interviews. Is that happening, or is that just a myth?
It's happening. It's happening, Angela, through my book, because I address this. I just can't remember what chapter it is. So if your listeners want to, if they grab my book and want to flip to the chapter that's most relevant, it's chapter 9, We're Hurting Their Job Prospects. And in it, I detail what I learned, and there's a lot of anecdote, rumor, and myth out there, but turns out it's happening. I spoke to this wonderful guy named Phil Gardner at the Michigan State Center for Employment. I'm getting it wrong. It's the Employment Research Institute at Michigan State. Basically, his center takes a look at what's happening nationally when it comes to college students getting jobs. So they survey employers of every size and every region. They survey college students. So they decided, hey, wait a minute, is this all just myth or is it happening? And they've got data that says it's happening. That parents are very, very involved in the ways you just mentioned. Moms and dads involved in doing everything from sending a resume to a company to apply on behalf of their son or daughter without the son or daughter knowing. And so the employer calls up the son or daughter or emails them, and the son or daughter has no, recollection of the inquiry ever having been made and no interest in the company. Parents, negotiating salary and benefits. Typically, according to Phil Gardner, it's moms who kind of do the concierging, let me try to get you the interview, let me, try to get you that first step. It's dads who are more likely to step in and want to negotiate salary and benefits. These things are happening. It's simply an extension of the overparenting. It's the equivalent of, I'm never going to let you cross the street alone. I'm always going to be there and hold your hand, or I'm going to look at the cars left, right, left for you. Except it's the world of work, and it's it's loving. I know parents love their kids. They want them to get these jobs. The trouble is, any employer will tell you, if you're doing the job search for them, I'm not interested in them because I need an employee who can take the initiative and go to bat for themselves, and stand up to, a tough question or two and, demonstrate some grit and resilience. And, a parent making the inquiry is basically demonstrating to the employer the exact opposite, that the kid doesn't have what it takes to even try to get a job. How are they going to have what it takes to thrive in the workplace?
No, absolutely. It's so funny. This issue kind of baffles me just a little. I don't have children, and so I understand the caring part and everything. But I've mentioned to a couple of friends who are also single with no children. I've mentioned to them that we were going to be talking today and what we were going to be talking about, and they honestly didn't believe me that this even occurs. They were like, "That's impossible. That can't be happening." So. The other thing I've heard is that parents are trying to be the ones who personally sort of prepare their children for job interviews. And the thing that it made me think about, Monster.com was just founded in 1999, I believe. And the entire sort of job search process has really evolved in the past, 15 years. And so, maybe some of the parents are really up to date on how job seeking works in terms of the online pieces of it. But I kind of wonder even, if their advice is really that relevant always to the child, because I feel like the work world is just so different than when they started.
Yeah, it's a different work world in so many ways. Many people will cite the Great Recession as the cause of all of this overparenting, and the answer to that simply is no, it isn't, because parents were helicopter parenting when, we were in a boom economy. The recession obviously made things much more challenging and in some situations dire, and young adults, who come of age during a recession historically, are hit hard. And so the fact that this, recession has happened to the millennials on top of the way in which their childhood underprepared them for the skills needed in the workplace is sort of this double hit. In my book, I talk about an HR director who could hear a mom kind of prepping her kid in the lobby for the interview. And she told me, clearly this mom didn't think we could hear her. She was in our lobby telling her grown son what to say. And this kid, one of the things we've got to do is stop saying kid and child when we mean a 24-year-old. This young man, was applying to be an EMT, to ride around in the back of ambulances and save people's lives. And his mother was prepping him for the interview. And it was this classic example of, what do you think your son's going to do when you're not right there? Don't you want to know he has the skills to look within himself and summon the wherewithal to be what he needs to be in the moment, whether it's an interview or in the back of the ambulance, on a call. I think, parents came of age at a different time. They're not necessarily aware of, the same dynamics in today's workplace, what works, what doesn't. But even if parents are quite savvy about today's workplace and are quite savvy about, the Monster.com process and, how one makes their way in the workplace today, they still must not do it for their sons and daughters. The reputation of millennials in the workplace today, certainly not all of them, but many is, they don't know what to do unless you specifically tell them, and they want a pat on the back every time they've done some little thing. Well, this is the direct result of what I call the checklisted childhood, which is a childhood that's been laid out by a parent. You must do this and that, this school, these classes at this school, this level of achievement, these activities, this leadership, this community service, and so on and so on. This enrichment, this coaching, this handling will happen, and that's your childhood, and it's laid out for you. Then you get out into the world, and there's no path. There's nobody there to kind of lay your path for you or tell you exactly what to do. No. The world is this wonderful, beautiful, scary, vast, wide open landscape of possibility and opportunity where good things, are possible and bad things are lurking. And you've got to have a sense of how to navigate yourself, not, following your mom or dad. And so, one of the things that I talk about in the book is how, I went to talk to the folks at Teach for America that's been sending, young adults, college graduates to work in underperforming school systems for 25 years. Lately, they've seen parents want to be very involved in, selecting the apartment where the core member lives and intervening if their child, quote unquote, has a problem at the school. Well, this child, don't forget, is a teacher standing up in front of a classroom in front of kids and is an employee of whatever school district they're in. There's just no role for a parent in that dynamic, yet parents feel there is. But even more concerning, Teach for America told me, is, what they're noticing is among some of their core members, they don't know how to think outside the box. They don't know how to, if you give them A and tell them to get to D, they can't get there. They need you to also tell them B and C. They need to follow a path to the outcome. They're happy to work very hard, but they want you to lay out the steps for them. So, this is, like I said, it's the checklisted childhood coming home to roost. We've really, really shortcut our kids' chances to, be not just competent, but, excellent employees because we've not made them, do things for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It makes me think of, in my previous career, I was a digital marketing executive and I generated sales online for various companies. And so within my career coaching practice, I will get people who will come in and, they'll have an interest in, going into digital marketing for the first time. And I've had a few people say to me, hey, where can I take a class to learn how to do this? Like, where can someone teach me how to do this? And although there are more classes available for digital marketing now than there ever have been, my feedback is often, digital marketing is a very entrepreneurial sort of field. It's always evolving. You have to be able to be proactive and really teach yourself things and jump in on your own. And if you don't have that personality or that drive, it's probably not the right space for you because the minute you learn how the field works, the whole field will have changed. But you have to be able to be, I think, an independent thinker and sort of drive things on your own. I don't know. I think there's a lot of value in being able to do that.
Yeah. I've just been flipping through my book as we've been talking and realized there's another chapter that discusses this, the concern about parental involvement in the workplace. And it's chapter 4 where I talk about one of the motivations for overparenting is succumbing to the college admission arms race. And so we feel we have to, do everything for our kids in order to get them into the right schools and jobs. And, of course, paradoxically, they end up underprepared because they lack the skills because we've been doing it for them. And here's where I quote some statistics from Phil Gardner, that guy at the Collegiate Employment Research Institute at Michigan State. And I thought you might be interested.
Yeah.
So he surveyed 725 employers. 23% reported seeing parents sometimes to very often when hiring a college senior. Okay? 23%, so almost a quarter of 725 employers reported seeing parents sometimes to very often. And through the survey, he found that parents were obtaining 40% of those surveyed who saw parents had parents obtaining information on the company. 31% were submitting a resume saw parents submitting a resume on behalf of a student.
Oh my gosh.
26% had parents advocating that their son or daughter obtain a position or salary increase. 17% had parents attending a career fair. And then the list goes on further to smaller percentages. But that characterizes the nature and extent of, how parents are involved in the job seeking of their grown children.
That's shocking. I mean, that's a huge amount. And that's just the amount that they know of, that they know about. Wow. That's really incredible. I mean, in your mind, we've kind of talked about it, but do you think parents are aware of the potentially negative impacts that they're having by, trying to help in this way?
I don't think parents are aware of the negative impact because if they were, they wouldn't be doing it. We love our kids fiercely and we want them to thrive, and we've just gotten it wrong when it comes to, helping them. We've taken help in the wrong direction. I think the most loving thing we can do for kids is teach them to do for themselves. And so it goes back to things like chores. Kids today are often either so busy with school and activities or, in affluent communities, they quote unquote don't have to. And yet if kids don't do chores around the house, they don't develop that sense of personal accountability, responsibility. I'm expected to do something to contribute. If they're not asked to do chores, they're never going to develop that sense of, hey, let me pitch in and help even when I'm not asked. Which is, probably number one, what's looked for in the workplace. Right? Someone who doesn't wait to be asked for a task, but who jumps in and says to their boss, hey, do you need something done today? How can I help? Right? The initiative taking. So chores at home are a really foundational, formational, set of things that are crucial to a developing human. Not doing their homework. We are, as parents around the country, we're over-helping when it comes to math or science projects or English papers. And, yes, parents are still helping in these ways in the workplace, Angela. A kid who's always had their mom or dad look at their homework will still need that in college, and they'll still need it in the workplace. Because essentially, here's where the psychological harm to kids comes in. Essentially, this very well-intended parent has sent the very insidious message to their kid, hey, kid, I don't think you're capable of doing any of this without me.
Right.
So they're still very, very much tethered to mom or dad when they get out into the world of work. Essentially, we're raising our kids to be like veal. This is a term not coined by me, but coined by this great superintendent in Massachusetts named Joe Maruschek. And Dr. Maru, as he's called, was on the phone with me one day, and he said, Julie, these kids are like veal. I see it in my school district. I see it as a softball coach. We're preparing them to be, lovely and wonderful. We're taking all the hard aspects of life out of their lives and doing it for them. Well, what happens to veal? Veal's purpose is to be raised for slaughter.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening in the workplace. And I have this terrible example in my book. It's not a representative example, but it's one of those horrifying examples that I think can get people's attention. A young man, before the economic recession, working in investment banking, making $250,000 a year and working his tail off. And his mother thought he was being worked too hard. And this mother took it upon herself to find the boss's landline, which was not easily found. So she had to do some hard work to find this man's phone number. She called him on the weekend, found him at his desk, and spoke to him about how he was overworking her son.
Oh, no.
Well, on Monday, the son shows up for work in his, high-rise and his skyscraper, investment firm, and he doesn't even make it past security. Security hands him a box with his belongings, and there's a note on the box that says, ask your mother.
Oh, no. Really?
The point is, of course this guy was being worked really hard. That's why he was making $250,000 a year.
That's right.
And hey, if he's got a problem with it,
right,
then coach him how to say, hey, I need to get some kind of a break. But when you do it for your kid, instead of teaching your kid to have that tough conversation with a boss, which they're going to need to do, if you do it for them, all you show the boss is that boss has actually employed a child. And nobody wants that.
Oh, that's just shocking. And you're right. If you make $250,000 a year, there's a certain set of expectations that come along with it. And you just have to decide, are you okay with it? Are you not? If you're not okay with it, how do you want to handle it? But mom should not be calling your boss.
Right. And of course, the extra sad thing about this terrible example is we don't know if the child, quote unquote, even knew his mother was helping him in this way, quote unquote, helping. We don't know whether he asked her, whether she did it completely behind his back, whether he tried to persuade her not to. We don't know. The point is she took matters into her own hands.
Right.
And he paid the very, very significant consequences.
No, for sure. It's because it's very hard to find a job that pays that much. Like they're rare. So if that's the kind of position that you want, you really have to protect it. And it's, you're right. It may or may not have been his own opinion. I know with my business, there are many weeks where I may work 7 days a week because I love what I do and I work really hard at it. But I get tons of feedback from family and friends of, gosh, why do you work so hard? You own your own business. You can stop at 5 on Friday and, what difference does it make? And I'm like, this is what I want to do. So I've definitely noticed feedback from people who they just have a different set of priorities, which is fine. But how awful that man lost his job when that may or may not have even been how he felt.
Right. There's a great example in the book. There's some employers have embraced this phenomenon of parents wanting to be involved in the workplace. I think they're in the minority, but they do get attention in the press. And the head of HR at Ernst & Young, Nancy Altobello, sat down with me, and she said, look, at first I didn't know how to work with millennials, but then I realized they were going to be the biggest portion of our workplace really quickly, and I needed to figure out, how to work with them and help them thrive. And that's precisely what she did. And she learned, you got to be very clear with them about how their role fits into the bigger picture, be very clear with them about what you're expecting, take an interest in them, so there's a lot of mentoring going on. And she loves her millennials. She says once you figure out, how to work with kids who've been raised this way, they'll work really, really hard for you, harder than any other generation, she said to me. The problem is we can't all count on our kids having a boss like Nancy Altobello, who's, training her managers to work, with millennials. What we've got to do is prepare our kids for the workplace, not knowing, and not having any control over who their boss will be, and not deluding ourselves that we can just get in there and fix it if there's a problem. Our kid has to, our kids shouldn't be hearing feedback in the workplace, constructive criticism, for the first time. They should have, had some feedback in childhood about, chores, helping out around the house, doing their homework. If we've shielded them from all of that kind of constructive feedback in life, their boss is going to be the first person to give it to them, and then they're going to say, as happened to a friend of mine at Google, wait a minute, no one's ever told me that I have a problem like this. It must be Google, or you, manager, not me. I mean, who wants their son or daughter to say that to their boss? It's just, it's a death sentence.
Well, I have found with my clients and just people I talk to in general that, if someone struggled at some point early in their life, oftentimes they are just so much more resilient and they have more of that, what you mentioned, grit. So when problems do arise, it's not like the end of the world or shocking or, they're able to push through it and continue to be successful despite things that happen. And that would be kind of my concern with these young people, is that as they get older and they're promoted and things become tougher, how do they handle that really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
and I think this is the long-term thing here, Angela, is our job as parents is to put ourselves out of a job. And we've succeeded, barring significant special needs. That is, we've succeeded if we've raised our kids to self-sufficient independence. And it doesn't mean we have to stop loving them. Nope, we're supposed to love them forever, but we're not supposed to be hand-holding them through their life. That just simply undercuts their chances, and one day we won't be around to do that. And then what? They will be upset with us, and rightfully so, if we've handheld their every step along the way, and then we're gone one day. They will simply be incapable and lonely and bewildered and lost and lacking in skills, and that's a parenting fail.
So when you see parents who say they have a recent college graduate, that's their child, and they really do want to do something to help them, maybe this person's really struggling to find a job or find a career, what could they realistically do in your mind that would be helpful?
Well, they ought to sit down with their kid and talk about, okay, you want to apply for a job, you're going to need a great resume. Let me give you some examples. I've got a resume, or two lying around here. Let me hook you up with a coaching, with a career coach who can give you some advice. But you got to make it clear with your language and your behavior that your kid is in charge. I mean, if you haven't already done this, if your son or daughter is out of college or nearing the end of college, and you haven't already had this conversation that I'm about to say, you need to have it, which is, hey, son or daughter, you're an adult now. And what that means is our role in your life shifts. We will always love you, and we'll always be here to give you advice. But what this means is you're in charge now. You're in the driver's seat. You get to make decisions. You decide how often we're in touch with each other, and so on. So that's an important, mindset shift. And that conversation should take place ideally before they go to college. But if not, as soon as possible after. And then, you're there to provide the advice and guidance, so you rewrite the resume for them. You don't say to yourself, well, he's too busy, I'll do it for him. No, he's got to go through the hard work of figuring out what to put on his resume and how to to respond to the feedback you'll give him about how he's described things or how she's listed this or that in whatever order. We can give them our reaction, but we mustn't do it for them. You can prep a kid for an interview by saying, okay, let's imagine what it's going to be like to be, that interviewer interviewing you. What are they going to want to know? What are some questions they might ask? Role play that with your kid, but put them through the paces. Make them do the hard work of thinking up what they'll say. Give them feedback about how they came across, but don't give them a script to memorize, because if you give them a script to memorize, they'll get off script. And the interviewer will realize, hey, this isn't authentic to this this man or woman. It's coming from somewhere else. And that's where you've kind of left them bewildered out in the world if you've sort of made them memorize a script. So essentially, it's get out of the driver's seat. Sit shotgun if you want. Better yet, sit in the back. Better yet, wave as they drive away. They've got to be in the driver's seat in their own lives.
Absolutely. So what about if you're on the flip side? Say you're the grown child who is in your 20s, like you're 25 years old, and your parents are, have a tendency to do something like the person you mentioned and call your boss. How can you, as the child, if you recognize, hey, this isn't working, I don't think this is going to play out well, how can that child sort of change that path for themselves?
Right. And so that child has to not think of him or herself as a child anymore. Mm-hmm. Okay? A 25-year-old is not a child. And so there's a mindset shift that has to happen among 20-somethings in their own heads and hearts and souls to say, you know what, I'm not a kid anymore. I don't have all the answers. I'm not fully grown, but, I have the right and responsibility to be in charge of my own path and my own way and my own plans and choices. So I'd say first adopt that, make that shift in your own being. Second, have a loving, kind conversation with mom and or dad or whomever is raising you or raised you and say, look, folks, I know you love me. I know you're worried. I know you just want to help, but I've got to do this myself. Please trust that I've got the skills and I've got the values that you've inculcated in me, and let me do this. Mm-hmm. I really need you to. And, that kind of conversation actually will give a parent tremendous confidence. What we want more than anything is to know our kids have got what it takes. And when they signal to us that they've got what it takes, it allows us to take a huge, deep exhale and back away. So, I think that goes pretty far.
Absolutely. So what about our listeners who may be actually a manager of someone that's in their, 20s who exhibits some of these things, and they're getting the sense that, mom and dad are overly involved? Do you have any suggestions for how a manager might proceed with one of these young people?
I think what that manager ought to do is sit down with that worker or a set of them and say, okay, guys, there's some things that you've got to know about what it takes to thrive in this workplace and probably other workplaces, and I want to talk to you about that. Here's what I want to see. Here are the habits and capacities and behaviors I'd like to cultivate in you. You're talented. We've hired you because you have what we think it takes to succeed, and this is the growth opportunity for you. So I'd be very explicit about we're seeing there's an opportunity here for growth. There's a skills gap, as there always is, between a new employee and the job that they've been hired into. There's room for growth. Mm-hmm. Be explicit about what that is, and then set it up as an encouraging, motivating thing. We want you to grow and develop, and here's what it's going to take. And when you've got these skills, you're going to be able to move on and do this and that. Initiative taking. Being interested in the grunt work is something that young employees have a hard time with. I spoke to a woman named Alexa Gilliford at Group InSearch, which is a corporate search firm in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And, she's always sifting through resumes for entry-level candidates to be placed in, high-level Bay Area companies. Mm-hmm. And, she gave this feedback. She said, young employees need to be interested in the work itself. Don't say, I'm okay. It's okay. I'm fine with doing the administrative part. Don't roll your eyes. Say, I'm going to kill it with the administrative part. Mm-hmm. Be excited about the actual job. Number two, she said, be interested in paying your dues. Don't suggest that this job is a pill you're willing to swallow just to get your foot in the door. The phrase foot in the door is a no-no phrase because it means you're not interested in that work and you only want promotion. No one wants to hire the foot in the door candidate. And then number three, once you have the job, be proactive and take the initiative. Be able to anticipate the next steps. Think to yourself, okay, he asked for X for this meeting. I'm going to have to do Y and Z after that. If employees can't think to themselves, I know what happens next, I know how to stay ahead of the game, and then act upon those instincts, they won't advance.
Oh, completely. Well, so do you have any predictions about what the workforce will, or just what the business world will look like in, say, 20 years when the 25-year-olds are 45 and they're in positions of management? Do you have any predictions on what's going to happen?
Oh, I have no idea. But
Okay.
I will tell you this. I just heard on the radio that it's official that millennials are the biggest population in our nation. They make up, 25%, or 20, I think it's 25% of the U.S. is now under the age of 33. And so millennials have, are bigger than the baby boom. And so the world is, our nation will be run by this wonderful generation. Okay, some of them have been overparented to such an extent that they lack the skills that will mean they are going to be capable of thriving, and we've got to turn that around for their sake and for ours as a nation. I think so maybe because I'm not in your sector, I don't think about what's the world of work going to look like nearly as much as I think about what are therapist couches going to be like?
Oh, true.
I think millennials are going to say at some point, in their mid-30s, maybe 40s, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Why did I get a trophy every time I showed up? Why were my parents helping me so much? Now I don't feel I have confidence in my own capabilities. What's up with that? So, if I was advising people what career to go into, I'd say, being a therapist, I think there's going to be a growth in that market. But on a more serious level, I think millennials, as with any generation, are good, wonderful, hardworking, smart people who just want a chance to make their way and make a difference, in the world in some way, like everyone else. And so, they're figuring out, how to, to be the way they want to be in the world. And, I have confidence that, whatever their upbringing was, they will develop a hunger to be and do for themselves, and chart their own course and live their own life and make their way and, and be able to pay their way. And not just kind of come home and flop on mom's or dad's couch. So, I'm optimistic about, the millennials' ability to turn this around. But I think, that said, it's not going to be easy.
Absolutely. I think, just kind of reflecting back on our conversation, I've noticed, especially with my clients who are millennials, they have really incredible, for example, value sets, and they really value doing good over money, and there are a lot of really positive things. So I think from my perspective, I just would definitely encourage them to try things on their own, to be comfortable with the idea of failure. It's not the worst thing ever if everything you do doesn't come out perfectly, and to just, keep moving forward and keep trying to grow on your own by yourself. But we've covered so much today. I really appreciate your time, Julie. Are there any last words that you'd like to leave us with? Any other advice that we haven't covered?
Well, Angela, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to be with you and your listeners. Just to your last point about failure, absolutely. I think you've I managed not to use that word much in our conversation, and I'm glad you did, because it's at the heart of everything. It's that precise intersection of what parents try to prevent and yet what must happen in a life of a developing human if they're ever going to have the capabilities and competencies and confidence and courage they're going to need in order to, thrive out there in the world. So, we've got, as parents, we've got to stop seeing failure as a bad thing. We've got to actually say, yep, they needed to learn that lesson. Childhood used to prepare a young person for adulthood with its trials and tribulations, with its opportunities and with its disasters. We became ourselves. And when parents try to smooth the road too much and prevent all the painful and harmful and, bruising things from happening, it's very lovingly motivated, but it actually harms kids when it harms kids not to be harmed a little bit by by the failings and falls that will come. So yeah, I agree with you there. Couldn't agree with you more. When it comes to me and my work, your listeners can find me at howtoraiseanadult.com. On my website, you can see a trailer for the book. You can find links to buy the book. You can share your own stories of how you've overcome an overparenting tendency. I'm on social media at How to Raise an Adult on Facebook, at the handle Raise an Adult on Twitter. And, I hope to be coming to your neck of the woods sometime soon this summer, late summer, and we'll keep you posted on that. And just thanks so much for having me. And go get my book, How to Raise an Adult.
Yes, fantastic. Well, Julie, thank you so much. This has just been great. I love this perspective, and it's been so nice to talk with you today.
Thank you for having me, Angela. Take care.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast. And if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.